Well, first of all, I want to congratulate Manchester and Interact. They made a mistake inviting me, but it's great the turnout. And I know I'm from London, I'm very sorry about that. London is Quango Central, so I'm very pleased to be out of that morass. And I like the North, and we may turn to housing, because whenever I wrote and spoke about housing, I always found the reception to my proposal for mass manufactured housing much more favourable in the North than in London, where the basic response in housing, as in everything else, is you can't do that. Now, I do recognise one or two facets of neoliberalism. Speaking about infrastructure, which I know is important to Grace's job at the IPPR, I am very conscious that the Treasury in particular is much more, if you take railways, much more interested in price signals than railway signals. And, well, that went down wrong. And, you know, that does show their infatuation with stupid economic theories and all of that. And I also recognise that part of the neo bit of the neoliberalism is it's not just supposed to be laissez-faire, which was a state getting out of everything. With neoliberalism, so its theorists suggest, its critics I should say, you know, the state does organise markets, plays an active role in deregulation, upholds property rights, and in particular wants to crush the labour movement. If you take Paul Mason's book, which if you can spell my name, you can find a long and critical review of. So I get all of that, and you know, I can see some of that, but I don't recognise it as a useful concept, neoliberalism, and I want to suggest to you that there's much more to the world than its critics suggest. Now, the first point to ask is, when did it begin in their view? And already we get a sort of blurring of what's going on, because some people maintain that it was with Pinochet in Chile in 1973. Mason himself says all of these things. Some say it was with Jim Callahan in the 70s. I know none of you know who these people are because you're so sprightly, but I know who they are. Some people say it's with Thatch, 79, and then perhaps most convincingly you could say it was to do with the end of the Cold War. Now you could say, well look, James, don't be pedantic, you know, it's a sort of gradual trend, and you know, it's building to a crescendo. I think it is quite interesting, just as a footnote, to notice that Ernst Schumacher, one of the godfathers of green, in his Small is Beautiful in 1973, the same time as Pinochet, just coincidentally, did coin the phrase natural capital, did believe that green things, the countryside and rivers and stuff like that, were capital, and then we see after that a whole series of efforts, properly opposed by my mortal rival, George Monbiot, to put a price on nature. And I, you know, just for once, because one must be broad-minded, I think George is right. You can't put a price on nature, it's stupid. So in terms of the sort of simple man's, my view of neoliberalism, you know, is it, as Wilde once said, you know, that they know the price of everything and the value of nothing? Yes, they are very vulgar, and this is where the price signals come in. But apart from the date of origin, I just want to say that, and I've got all the numbers on my laptop, it's the only reason it's out, is if you go to the OECD, I'd rather not, and you look up general public expenditure as a proportion of GDP, you will find that it's broadly on the rise, has been rising, and has not collapsed since 1995, since 2008, when it took a dip because they had to clean up the mess, and then it's been back up again. And I can give you the numbers, but just as an indication, the 2015 numbers for the total public expenditure in the United States, which the critics of neoliberalism would suggest ought to be down in 10%, 20%, it's 37.6% of American GDP is spent on public expenditure, or that's the proportion of public expenditure compared with GDP. And that's more than Ireland, more than Korea, more than Switzerland, and interestingly, more than Russia. Now you could say, James, you're being naive. A lot of that is defence. I specialise in defence. 3.3% of that 37.6 is defence. You could say, especially after Charlottesville and everything, well, what about public order? What about it, I say? Well, only 2% is spent on public order. That's less than Spain, you can see why right now, Greece, our Syriza friends, Hungary and Poland, and the Slovak Republic. So even if you go to a European sort of bastion of reputedly free market neoliberal doctrine, Switzerland, in 2005, 34.02% of Swiss GDP was on public expenditure. Today, it's 33.89%, so it's actually marginally up. And I'll give you all the numbers for education and health and so on, but remarkably, health has gone in the United States from 6.5 in 95, in the year 95, to 8.92 in 2010, to 9.081 in 2015. So even health expenditure, which is, health in the US is kind of the acme of how awful the right can be, as we all know. You know, if you're run over, can you pay, and all of that. Even there, public expenditure in the state is a major reality in the US, even in healthcare, partly for demographic reasons and so on. So, you know, as a watertight concept, you know, that goes a bit further than, yes, there are a bunch of price vulgarians, I don't really buy neoliberalism. And if you take the important thing that Woudhuysen suggests, I don't know what my colleagues here want to say, but if you take crushing the labour movement, doesn't that have a bit more to do with the weakness of the left than the ferocity of the Cameron regime, or the equal ferocity of, what's her name now? Theresa May, that's it, yeah. I can't see it, right? I've been baton charged by the police outside Pentonville prison in the 70s. I've been thrown into prison by the French authorities, and I'm not really seeing the level of repression that one would expect after 30 or 40 years of neoliberalism. Unemployment is low, it's declining even in Spain. This is what incidentally gives the lie to the automation is taking all our jobs scenario. It's not, they're not investing in automation. It's a lot of talk, but it's not happening. And if we really are in a neoliberal economy, what about the fact that the CBI calls for wage rises? We're not getting the wage rises, we understand that it's purely rhetorical, but it is a historical departure for the Confederation of British Industry to say, no, we need wage rises. Right? That's new in my 45 years of activism in the labour movement and on the left. I think the concept of neoliberalism doesn't also deal, because I just hinted at this about automation, with the innovation crisis that exists in the West. There is more state expenditure in Korea on R&D every year. It's going up and up. Same in Korea. It's quite right-wing, quite free market. Right? Although, again, broader state expenditure, not just on R&D, is on the up in Korea. It's on the up in China. It's on the up under Modi, although it's still no good, in India. So I don't think the concept of neoliberalism deals with these new realities and the weakness of investment, the weakness of innovation, and those things. That isn't, in fact, my major objection. I think it's a misplaced criticism that is made of neoliberalism, because it's not really deregulating. It does liberalise stuff, but if you work for BT, and I've consulted for my sins for BT, you'll find that the main thing that calls the shots in BT is their regulation unit. They're always discussing much more than putting in broadband. You know that technology is increasing exponentially. Everything's exponentially unless you want a broadband line in Manchester in a hurry, in which case you'll have to wait a long, long time. The reason you have to wait a long, long time is they're much more interested in discussing Ofcom at BT. Ofcom's alive and well inside BT, really. So it's not deregulation, there's some liberalisation. It's not the old nationalised industry, but the state is forever tweaking, and government and corporations are already always getting more and more interested in the regulatory dimension of what they do. And in fact, the state has blurred the boundaries between the private and the public in the realm of the corporation. Much more importantly, though, it's blurred the boundaries between the private and the public in our everyday lives. And if you take Public Health England, right, I don't know whether you follow it, I'm sure you have, but do you really want to go down to the local hospital and have an exercise class, a facial, you should be walking faster in order to stay thin, you know, you need, the one good thing they're saying is let children play out a bit more, that's good, and Jeremy Corbyn, to his credit, has supported that. But in every other dimension, whether it's food, fags, obesity, parenting, you name it, they are really intruding the state more and more in people's lives to an extent that never happened under Callaghan, under Wilson. That's what Tony Blair was all about. That's what the Third Way was all about. It wasn't rabid deregulation. Right? There was liberalisation. Of course they made concessions to the capitalists. Of course they did that. But the new event, which is not so new now, is this sort of psychobabble that they do all the time about, you know, you're all mentally ill, we're all vulnerable, we're all victims, we need to see a psychiatrist. As Sam Goldwyn said in the Metro Goldwyn Mayor, anybody who sees a psychiatrist needs his head examined. I know that's very offensive, you know, I'm very sorry about all the mentally ill people here. But just to conclude, if I haven't pissed you all off already, you know, the state does have a role in my constructive conception of the future, right? And that is, you should do a lot more R&D, big time, right? Because you can't rely on the capitalists to do it, because it's a long-term affair, R&D, and they're all on the quarterly business results. Right? It should play a big role in building new industries, mass-produced housing, HS2, but I'd rather have the Hyperloop, thanks, across the Pennines, and all of that. It ought to get behind that. It ought to raise the level of public debate about the Hyperloop. It should be making all kinds of other new industries, which I've written about, and I'm very happy to discuss. But just if you take the North, housing and transport, it could be doing a lot in all of that. And one of the things it ought to do in housing, paradoxically, if we're broad-minded, is it should deregulate the land. If you go down to the British Library and you get the Town and Country Planning Act of 1948, 47, it's that thick. Since then, there have been 5 decades, 6 decades of more planning, more regulation, so you can't even put up a conservatory off the A6 or whatever it is without somebody coming in and telling you you can't do it. If you deregulated the land, the Daily Mail would be very upset, but land values would decline because you could build nearly everywhere, including on the green belt, otherwise known as scrub. And obviously we preserve for our green friends national parks and all the rest of it, but land values would drop, and it's land that constitutes 2/3 of the value of a house. It's not the building, it's the land. So if we want affordable housing, cheap housing, housing that doesn't leak, that has the Wi-Fi built in, that has the solar panels built in, that is iPod homes or iPad homes, or whatever it is, then we can get the factories to do it. Hooray, they won't do it down in London, but they will do it up in Manchester, where they actually understand what the word engineering means. But hand in hand with mass manufacture, we actually have to deregulate the land. Does this make me a neoliberal? I hope you'll see further than that. The final way that the state should intervene is that it should, in building new industries and putting money behind automation, a lot of people may be made redundant. It should be much more generous and serious, not about providing benefits for victims to the limited extent that it does now, but providing really serious training and financial transitional measures to allow workers displaced from the old industries, which are actually a lot of the time still kept alive by the state. Britain has an extremely weak bankruptcy regime. A lot of firms need to go bankrupt. I'm sorry to say it, but if you're to build new jobs that are high-skill, high-tech, competitive, fun, new industries, rather than sort of, you know, grubbing around with private taxi firms and all of that, you need to get serious about transitional measures, because those taxi drivers need jobs. They won't get them immediately with new industries. That takes time. So the state should step in on that. I don't mind the state. I do mind it intruding in my private life, and I wish Jeremy would say something about Public Health England. I've done a big Google search. I couldn't see anything that he said about it except play out. It doesn't seem to be part of his landscape, what's happening with the alcohol warnings, the cigarette warnings, the vaping warnings, and basically the warnings culture. You know, it's all an attack, mostly on the fat, white, beer-drinking working class up north who are all racist bigots, as we understand, because they voted Brexit. And if you don't want to be part of that Blairite kind of denunciation of normal people, then I hope you'll join me in saying neoliberalism, schmeoliberalism, but we need a wider critique of today's capitalism, not the Pinochet stuff or whatever it was that began 40 years ago. Thank you so much.